perfectingtheworld.com.
Hello, Israel.
Hi, Pesach. How are you?
Baruch Hashem, I'm well. I've been looking forward to this chat. And were you planning on doing introductions, or should I begin with my apology?
Oh, no need for apologies. Why would you apologize?
Well, I mean, the funny thing is our interactions. Oh man, the world is so crazy right now. I mean, and I've had a few interactions with you where I was a little bit bullheaded, and I feel very defensive right now. I feel like the Jewish people are under siege, is how it feels right now, for better or worse, right? And I think a couple times I responded a little bit short with you, and so that's not how I am. But in the middle of my day, when I'm about things, I respond sometimes a bit curt. So I apologize for that.
It's understandable.
Yep. Well, I appreciate your understanding.
Fine. Yeah, of course. Comes with the territory. I understand where that feeling comes from, the under siege thing that you're describing. Yep. Yeah, I mean, like, I'm a Jew as well, so obviously I know what that's about, but I have taken steps to distance myself from the traditional Jewish mainstream labels because I don't agree with it. But yeah, tell us a little bit more about yourself. What's your background? Were you always an Orthodox Jew?
Nope, I was not always Orthodox. I've always been Jewish, but not always Orthodox. I was actually raised evangelical Christian, raised by very devout evangelical parents. And my journey is interesting. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but in my 20s, I became very secular, very atheist. Very skeptical. I'm very science-minded. I'm a very skeptical thinker. I ask the questions. Something that I value in you as well. And my skepticism led me out of religion. And when I came back to the Creator, it was not through my intellectual journey. It was first through recognizing that I'm a happier person and the world is a happier place for me when I have a creator and a purpose and a mission in the world. And about 10 years ago, I made my return back to the idea of a creator. And it was only in the context of that return that I began to embrace my Judaism. First it was exploring what Shabbat means. Then it was, and of course, all of my learning was done against the backdrop of the fact that I was raised in a very Protestant, evangelical, Bible-only environment. So a lot of my default assumptions have been to exclude the rabbis, to exclude the rabbinic project and the rabbinic tradition, and to look at things from a Bible framing. And in the midst of all this, I mean, I learned Hebrew on my own. I'm proud of that, although sometimes my Hebrew does sound like I learned it on my own, honestly. And I became Orthodox about 5 or 6 years ago. And some pretty amazing pieces in my life have come together at the same time as me becoming Orthodox. But I've been growing in my Torah relationship, my Torah observance for the last 10 years. And recently I've been developing a teaching platform, and most of our students are in the non-Jewish world, and they usually typically identify currently, or they have identified in the past as either Messianic, or sometimes they call it Hebrew roots. And in common, they share a desire to learn the Hebrew Bible, to learn Torah from a perspective that's bigger than what they've inherited. And so they're excited to learn more of a Jewish framing on the scriptures. And because of my background, I'm a very Bible focused, a very Mikra scripture focused person, and I think that helps to bridge a lot of the worlds, if that makes sense. And I know that you speak to a lot of people in the same worlds that I speak to as well. And I'm sure you've seen that culturally, a lot of people come from a different situation, and they end up with different interpretations because of that too. So, so it's exciting. It's exciting. That's my story, and part of my learning, I spent a lot of time. I still learn the historical Karaite Hachamim sages. That's been part of my historical study, and I am familiar with the exchange in the medieval times, mid ages, between the Rabbonim and the Karaim, and I find that exchange fascinating. I find the whole question of what could have been fascinating too. What could have been with the Karaim? What could have been with the relationship between the worlds? And why did the worlds develop the way they did? Why did the Karaim fall out of ascendancy? At one time, they were 40% of the Jewish world. And what happened? Why did history play out the way it did? I don't know, Israel. Do you identify with any particular movement? I mean, I've described you as a Karaite, but I don't know if that's even fair to you because I'm not sure if you identify as such.
Yeah, I'd say I don't limit myself to a particular label,
Sure.
but I obviously the Karaite would be the most convenient label because
Hmm.
they are people who claim to only follow scripture. Now I know that the Karaites have kind of their own community and tradition
Hmm.
and acceptable interpretations that they go with. So I find myself disagreeing sometimes with the Karaite tradition and interpretation. And generally speaking, I don't like labels because I don't. I mean, the Torah is just the Torah, so I don't really believe in the idea that people can have divergent viewpoints of the Torah to the extent that they're completely inventing a new Torah, which is the way I would view the oral Torah. Um,
Sure.
so
Yep.
that's why I think that there's got to be some at some point where we're like, okay, this is not representative of the Torah.
Hmm.
Um,
Right.
so that's the main thing that I'm concerned with when it comes to that. So I just call myself Torah observant, um,
Sure.
and but yeah, the Karaite would be the movement, I guess, that I would identify with more.
Got it. Okay, so you identify with the Karaite world, but the label itself you find limiting to some degree.
Hmm.
Okay, got it. Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
Very
And how did your Jewish family become Christian?
well. I was adopted into a non-Jewish family,
Okay.
so the my halakhically my birth mother was Jewish, and the family that adopted me, um, my father was Jewish. He's no longer alive. But I was raised as without even knowing I was Jewish. That was part of my story. There is I was unaware of such things. When in my teens, I became very serious about studying scripture, and that seriousness led me to discovering the Torah when I was 17, 18, maybe 19 years old. In that discovery of Torah, I became very discontent with the standard Christianity that I was familiar with. And the funny thing is, this is really interesting, is around 20, 22 years old, I decided to become Jewish. And that's when my parents told me I was Jewish. Again,
Mm.
maternal, halakhically, okay. Um, and it was shortly thereafter that both of my adopted parents passed away. Um, and it was in the midst of that as I mentioned, I went into a very skeptical, very agnostic, secular. My behavior wasn't secular. I wasn't like living in a way that was immoral, but my intellectual pursuits were very much in the world of skepticism and doubt. And again, and for me at that time, that was healthy. That was where I had to be. Um, and that created who I am today, right? And that's part of why I appreciate what you're doing, right? I appreciate the fact that you're putting a lot of these central questions about the Jewish experience, about Jewish practice, about Jewish ideas. I appreciate that you're putting them out in a way that people can dignify the questions. These questions need to be asked, they need to be looked at. We need to be aware of them. We don't need to hide them. That's one of the things I learned during my skepticism, was that questions shouldn't be hidden away. We should be able to have these discussions and look at them and use them as opportunities for formation. And that was, a big part of me, and that's again part of what I appreciate about what you're doing. Even though we don't always agree on the conclusions, right? I am an Orthodox Jew. I value the areas that you're causing friction. I value the areas where you're agitating, because I understand, the questions that you're asking, and to be clear, I mean, as I've said, I don't agree with your conclusions, but I respect and appreciate where you're at, and I'm grateful for your presence out there for these reasons. So, and as I recall, so no, I know your listeners know your biography quite well, but you grew up, you were a Haredi. I think you went to a Hasidic cheder school in California, right?
Mhm.
And you went through yeshiva. You got semicha as well too. Is that correct?
No, I didn't go that far with the smicha. I left yeshiva at 19.
Got it. Okay.
So yeah, I was on track to receive smicha. I mean, but it takes like 10 plus years.
Okay.
So I realized either I'm going to be part of this system and be here for the foreseeable future. I mean, the way
Sure.
that they even frame it is there's no time frame on it. You're actually just supposed to be in yeshiva as long as possible. Um, but at a certain point, I thought it was madness, and I did not like the environment. I did not like the path that it was leading me on. So I just left, and I initially went to school to become a psychologist. So I
Okay.
got
I
a
didn't know that.
bachelor's.
Okay.
Yeah, I got a bachelor's in psychology, but then I was very disillusioned with the secular institutions as well.
Mhm.
Um, and I realized I just don't want to follow these paths. I want to follow my own path, and I think that the world is in a troublesome place because everything is so institutionalized, and everyone says, "Oh, you got to go through this if you want to get here." And we tell you how to be, we tell you how to think, we tell you what to do. Well, we tell you the meaning of education, the meaning of God, and the meaning of just about everything is forced down people's throats. And to me, that was just completely against everything that I wanted to stand by and live for.
So I'm curious. What was your tipping point? You were in yeshiva. Were you learning here in the States, or were you overseas?
I was in the States.
Okay, you were. Okay. What was your tipping point? I mean, I've probably heard about 50, maybe even 100 hours of your content. I've heard
Well,
different pieces of your story, but what was your tipping point? Like what was building up in your thinking? What was
hmm,
causing you to question, and like what was the tipping point?
yeah, it's funny. I remember I met like a friend of mine from high school like a few years after I graduated, and he's like, "Yo, you changed." I was like, "Well, yeah." He's like, "When did this happen?" I was like, "Well, you haven't known me for like 5 years. Obviously, there's a process there. So I wouldn't say there was a singular tipping point, but it began like with one question, with another question, with another one, and pretty much just realizing that the institution and the ideology that I thought was unquestionable was actually highly questionable. And so as I began to ask questions, it first began with questioning one rabbi, and then questioning another rabbi, all the way to the point of questioning the existence of God himself. It reminds me of the Israelites in the desert when Moses was gone for too long. They decided they need a new God, right? And so I think that my God was so tied up with the rabbis that I didn't even perceive a possibility where I could follow God and the Torah without following the rabbis. Because, again, the way the oral Torah and the written Torah are presented to you in Orthodox circles, they're inseparable. They are one and the
Mhm.
same. So
Sure.
if you reject the oral Torah, you reject the written Torah, and you might as well not be observant. You might as well not believe. So.
So
Mhm.
And a theme I hear a lot in what you're saying is a very, I would almost call it like anti-institutional framing. Like God is direct relationship with God, and institution is suspect. Like we should hold them as a suspect. If a Torah civilization were to be built around that, how would questions of accountability and adjudicable practice be handled? And by adjudicable, I mean things that could be like brought to, that would need, for example, a legal ruling, be it in civil law or in ritual practice. How would Torah civilization work if institution was not possible?
Hmm. Well, I'm not saying that institution is not possible. I'm just saying that, as you said, institution is suspect. In fact, highly suspect, especially when it goes unchecked, especially when it's not following the ways that God set in place. See, the Torah's entire narrative is revealing to us the highly suspect, evil nature of mankind, and the fact that throughout all of human history, pretty much we've always chosen to do the wrong thing. And whenever there are a few times where individuals, select individuals, by the way, choose to do the right thing, that is the source of blessing for the entire world. But there's only a degree and an extent that could hold up before the evils of mankind overwhelm the good. So we should be suspect of ourselves. We should be suspect of the human condition.
Be, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
We should always question ourselves, always look at ourselves critically. And yes, I think that's important. But is it possible to have a civilizational?
Yeah, of course. Community? I mean, that's exactly what the Torah comes to solve, which is how can we have a civilizational community where there is law and order without human corruption entering the picture? And I think that that's why the Torah sets the stage. Make sure you don't take bribes. Make sure you don't lie. Make sure you don't bear false witness. The penalty for false witness is that you get the same thing done to you that you tried to do to that person, right? I mean, that's like the most intense standard of justice, an eye for an eye. I believe that's absolutely literal. I believe that a life for a life. You put people to death for sexual immorality. You put people to death for breaking Shabbat, right? Immediately, the stakes are very high. You need witnesses, and you need just courts, and you need all these things to go on in a very serious manner. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, the Torah says, do not add or subtract to these commandments. Follow everything that's written in this book. When that is the standard, I think that is the safety net, because now no one has the ability to come along and be like, oh, I have a new ruling, I have a new judgment, right? We are all equally bound by the same laws. There's no one who's above the law. There's no one who has the ability to change the law. We're all equal under the law. And when we're all equal under the law, and the law is God's law, that is the only way that we can guard against corruption. And within that, obviously, there are the possibility for people to lie and go against God, but then there's checks and balances. And ultimately, if we did our best to follow the Torah, I think we'd be in a way better position than we are right now, where the laws that people have do not really reflect the Torah, and the justice systems are completely corrupted.
So what I've observed, and I'm not sure how much of an experience of this you've had, you're probably you're living this right now, is that when we get people who are embracing Torah from outside the Jewish world, right? They're typically coming from a very independent framing of mind, right? They're coming at this with critical thought. They've given up institutions, they've given up traditions that held them back, and they've done some pretty heavy lifting, right? They've done some very like superhero type stuff to get to where they're at. I mean, that's true of a lot of the non-Jews that I meet that they love Torah, and they've done this work. They've given up the traditions of men. They've given up the institutions, right? But then on the other side of the equation, this is what I find, and I'd be curious to hear your reflection on this. They behave like cats. Like you can't herd cats, right? Cats they go wherever they want, right? And how do you organize around the principle of Torah supremacy, Torah's ascendancy, if all we have is private interpretation? What structures are there that allow for a national practice of Torah? That to me, this question to me, by the way, is a very heavy center of gravity, uh, in large part because I speak to a lot of people in these worlds that are like cats. But I'd be curious to hear your reflection on that.
Okay, cats is funny. I mean, cats are pretty
Why is
clean.
that?
And, I don't know. It's just funny, but they're pretty clean and good looking. So
Oh,
I don't know.
they are, sure.
But and I mean, top of the food chain. But let's just leave that metaphor aside.
Mhm.
Yes, there would need to be a place of unity in order for a nation to rally around Torah laws and come to some sort of consensus and understanding and common ground in order to have a commonality in how we observe Sabbath and festivals and some basic things. I definitely don't think we need consensus around every tiny little thing. I think that that's another big mistake or potentially deliberate problem that the rabbis created, which is that they have rules about every tiny little thing. And that to me is the death of freedom when you're being told what to do every single second of the day. The Torah is deliberately zoomed out, pointing to very specific, important things that we need to follow versus the small things doesn't matter so much. You do you, right? And let it all play out. And that's fine. Now, as far as it takes to create an organized culture and justice system around the Torah, obviously first we begin with the laws that are in the Torah, but there genuinely are real debates about certain concepts. Like we're going to have a debate right now about when does the day begin, right? Like that's a pretty significant debate, especially when it relates to the holidays and the Sabbath, right? Which the Sabbath has a death penalty attached to it, right? So I think that we have to live in the present moment. And in the present moment, we are not there is no Torah society. There is no nation that is governed by Torah law. Anyone who's following the Torah, whether they're in the United States or in the land of Israel or anywhere in the world, they're living within whatever country they live in, whether it's a secular democracy or a religious theocracy. It's not a Torah state, right? And so if you're keeping the Torah, you're doing it because you believe it, because this is your belief and your faith, and it's between you and God. You're more akin to Abraham than, say, to Joshua. Joshua was at the time in history where he was instituting a nation under the laws of Moses. But we are select individuals, what some would call the remnant, across the world, who actually still value the Torah, even though the laws are not enforced. No one's going to do anything to you if you break Shabbat, yet you still keep Shabbat. No one's going to do anything to you if you commit adultery, yet you don't commit adultery. No one's going to. I mean, like, there's hardly any checks and balances relating to the Torah. Definitely, when it comes to the eating laws or the food laws, this and that. People that follow the Torah in this current environment are people that are doing it based off of their own convictions. Now, if you're doing something based off your own convictions, then that is by definition an individual practice. It's you doing it because you believe it. So for you to then give up your own judgment and your own convictions for some meta conceptual non-existent unified nation, and that means submitting to a system which I'm sorry to I think is a dead system created by rabbis 2,000 years ago. That I think is unacceptable, and it shouldn't be demanded of people. And if right now people are on their own paths, and we do have to debate about even these small things, so be it. It's still a fulfillment of the Torah that says, speak of these words when you sit in your house, when you walk in the way, when you lay down, and when you arise. We need to talk about these matters of the Torah, and I don't think it's enough just to appeal to authority and be like, well, in the eventuality where there was a country, we would need to have consensus, and the consensus is the consensus of the rabbis, which, by the way, doesn't read at all like a consensus. It's more like a bunch of debates and opinions of rabbis of 2,000 years ago, which
there
is
are
not
lots of disagreements, of course, and for me, that's part of the integrity of the tradition, is the fact that we maintain and record that dissent. But I'm sorry,
again. So no, that's it. I mean, so you have every right to bring up Talmudic opinions in the conversation, to be like, hey, did you see what the Talmud said about this? But to bring it up as an authority, as like, oh, this is now a binding authority that you need to follow. I think that's where the problem arises, because now this is no longer an honest conversation about what is the true will of God and what is the true meaning of the text. It now becomes an appeal to authority. Oh, this is how it is, and if you don't follow it, the whole nation's going to fall apart. Well, I got news for you. The nation has fallen apart for the past 2,000 years. We've been in exile for 2,000 years. The majority of Jews are not even Torah observant. So they're holding on to nothing. Okay, the reality is, this is a time where we are exiled, dispersed, and it's up to each and every individual to find their own connection with God, and that is explicit in the Torah. What God says, when you are spread across the world and you're in the lands of your enemies and the blessings and the curses come upon you, follow the rabbis? No, it doesn't say that. It says return to God with all of your heart and all of your soul, you and your children, explicitly pointing to the individual and the family unit as the vehicle for return to God and the path to salvation. So any other message of salvation, whether it's the Christian message, which is like Messiah, right? Or if it's, Jewish, like, the Rebbe, the oral Torah, I don't, that, or like, like we need a sacrifice. That's the whole Christianity is like obsessed with a sacrifice. It's like, again, Torah doesn't say you need a sacrifice. It says you need to return to God, heart and soul. So I see that as actually what we're supposed to be doing in this current environment, and everything else is a distortion in my mind.
I appreciate your thoughts. My one of my bigger challenges was with what you said is the lack of tangibility. The rabbinic project, I agree, is flawed. It's wooden, and it is not capable of moving and adjusting very quickly. Why? Because we have the Mishnah. The Mishnah, in my framing, is the archive of the authority of the Beit Din Gadol of the Sanhedrin, right? And because of that, I hold that it's biblically required for Israel to be to not turn away from the rulings, right? But I do agree that there is a woodenness to it, and the discussion of the oral law itself is not something I necessarily want to go into today. I would like to look at the sunrise day, though, because that's something that we've been talking about on and off for a few months. If you don't mind, can we go to that topic right now? Is that something you're open to?
Yeah, we definitely can. I would just, if you don't mind me pointing out again,
Yeah.
regarding that acknowledgement. So it's a wooden system. It doesn't have the ability to adapt very well necessarily. The rulings that are recorded.
It's wooden. However, it has adapted well, but it's adapting in a survival mindset. It's not adapting with the highest level of authority, right? We don't have a Sanhedrin that's ruling on the use of,
which is exactly
electricity, for example. Go ahead.
Okay, right. So, which is exactly the challenge that you've said to me, was like, how are you going to deal with the current situation? It's like, well, no different than Orthodox Jews are dealing with it. I'm just not pretending that I have this imaginary authority of the high court. Like honestly, you've read the Mishnah. Can you give me a source in the Mishnah where the Mishnah says, like, assuming I believe what the Mishnah says, which already is a leap of faith to believe what the Mishnah records, assuming I believe it, where does the Mishnah even say, here are the list of court rulings from the high court and the temple?
It does not.
It doesn't even say
comes
that.
Packaged with disagreements.
So that's insane.
What's that?
I mean that means that the very claim that the Mishnah, the authenticity claim of the Mishnah is, oh, we are the rulings of the high court and the temple, which you have to listen to as per Deuteronomy 17, which, by the way, that assumes that there is even a temple like in existence and there is a court in existence.
Yeah.
The court is long gone, but
it's not the Sanhedrin at the same level as it was before the destruction of the temple. I mean, which is why the court didn't carry out, for example, skila, stoning, or the death penalty. So it is definitely a lower rung. And so for me, the fact that, yes, there are no explicit, like, here are the rulings, that's it. It's not like that. I mean, occasionally we do find statements like that. But by and large, everything comes packaged with dissent. Like, here's the Hakamim say, and then, Rabbi Meir says, right? Or, whatever it is, right? And to me, if it was trying to pretend, it would just give the rulings and that's it. But the fact is, I think you see this, and I don't think you're dispelling the Mishnah as having value, but the value that I see is in the fact that it comes to us with dissent, like differing opinions, right?
Which
And
is
that's
great,
part
by
of
the way. Which and but then someone at some point, either it's internal within the Mishnah, or it's in the Talmud, or it's in the post Talmud, where
Mhm.
someone said these arbitrary rules and opinions of rabbis somehow is the word of the living God, and we all have to follow it, and we have to follow the consensus of rabbis. Screw your
Yeah.
opinion. You can't
I mean, I have
disagree
to be
with it.
careful what I say here, but I don't. I mean, there are different ways of framing the authority of the Rabbonim, of the rabbis, right? And I don't hold, the Elu, Divrei Elohim. I think that's Agada, right? That's a that's not a binding halakhic opinion to be required to hold that everything the rabbis say is, quote, the word of God.
Well, I'll
Um,
pose this challenge to you, because I
yeah.
should have said this to Asher Meza when I was debating him the other day, which is because he has a similar opinion, which is,
Mhm.
we only have to follow the halacha, the law, but not the agadah, not the narrative structure of
Mhm.
the rabbis. And it's like, you realize it's the exact same rabbis saying these things. So, like, either you think these people, like, when it came to agadah, to like, metaphorical stuff, or ideologies, they were like lunatics, but then law, they were just such rational people, right? Like, if someone's ideology comes forth in all aspects of their view, of their worldview. So, whether it's their spiritual views of the world, or their legal worldview, it's coming from the same person. So I'm just curious, how do you justify saying, like, oh, I don't follow the spiritual rulings of the rabbi, just the legal rulings? You know what I mean? How?
Yeah, see, I'm comfortable with that, and a big part of why I'm comfortable with that is that, I mean, even in Mikra, there are we can see within Tanakh, like, okay, how do I frame this? I do hold that Mikra comes to us by Nevuah, by prophecy, and by Ruach Chodesh, right? But I mean, there are human opinions conveyed, for example, in the book of Job, or in Mishlei and Proverbs, and and we have room for such things even within our own scriptural tradition. And the authority of the shoftim, of the judges, the dayanim, was never extended to questions of what they teach. I mean, I think that you look at the development of authority within the Christian world, and you see the development of the church councils, of the creeds, and I think what you see there is beliefs become binding, ideas become binding. And I mean, I can't say that we don't have binding ideas in Judaism, but I can say that I don't. We're not required to hold that every agada is equally authoritative. I'm trying to find it. I have a quote from the Talmud Bavli, and I forget how it goes. I'm not sure if I can find it, but it's basically stating that the agada is the agada does not hold the same weight as the halacha. And I know I'm quoting from a rabbinic source to show that, right? But I think that this way of thinking is native to our tradition. I think that we've over absolutized the metaphysics and the Agada and the Midrashim. I get a little frustrated, honestly, with the degree to which the Midrashim have become like the Word of God, right? Like, this is the authentic story that's come to us from Sinai. I don't know. The Midrashim are statements that really are more revealing about the writer of the Midrash than it is about the text of the scripture. I mean, it could be both. It could be both. It could be both.
Right.
And
Well, again,
you
I
know,
mean,
and
I think that's a step in the right direction for the
Mhm.
Jewish people, not to be so wrapped up in every single statement that every single rabbi made, because there are some things that rabbis say that are preposterous, ludicrous, and immoral. So, it's definitely necessary to have that discernment. I think, for me, the way that I would reconcile all of these different statements, even Tanakh, biblical statements, including New Testament stuff, would be reconcile it with the Torah. The Torah is the ultimate measuring stick for, is what you're saying valid or not, because the Torah sets the stage for all of this to follow. Everyone is basing their reliability and authority on the Torah being true, and the Torah itself creates the standard that you cannot deviate from these commandments. You cannot follow different gods. You cannot, so essentially we have to hold everyone accountable to the Torah, and the Torah speaks about legal matters and it speaks about spiritual matters interchangeably. And so ultimately we have to look to the Torah as the final word. And I think that would apply to whether it's halacha or agadah, whether it's law or
I think
or
this is
narrative.
a fruitful area for discussion when it comes to agadah and halakha. I mean, it's something that needs to be looked at, truly looked at. And you said something too that really that really was helpful there. Give me a second. It struck me, and I wanted to comment right away, and I forgot. I'm sorry, Israel. I forgot what I was going to say.
No worries. Was it something relating to how everything has to be measured by the Torah?
Yeah, I'll measure by Torah for sure. Okay, so I will say this. I mean, when it comes to halacha, when it comes to consensus, because I accept the rabbinic framing, I do accept consensus. Okay, that to me is an important part of Am Yisrael. But when it comes to the Agadah, I mean, I very much I'm very much open to critical thinking about the Agadah and the Midrashim. Right? It can be frustrating sometimes to have a midrash like held over somebody to like conform to it when it's like talking about what is obviously not really historical, right? You probably have experienced that, and I'm not required to accept every midrash as though it's authoritative word of God from Sinai.
And I'd say whatever sentiment you're expressing about the midrash and the narratives.
I remember now. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just put the statement, and I want to hear what you're going to say. The sentiment that you're expressing about the midrash and the narratives of the rabbis, I have that sentiment about the midrash and about the halacha and about their laws, because I think their laws and interpretations are just as arbitrary and absurd as their spiritual opinions.
And the funny thing is, and you might find this shocking, is I can't disagree with you. I mean, I mean, you look at Tanakh, okay? I hold the Chumash, the Torah, to a higher level of divine inspiration, right? I hold it as the highest level of nevuah, right? And we go to some the writings and so on, the Ketuvim, and there are ideas within the writings that reflect the culture of the time, right? And that's just the nature of the human experience. And even though there's Ruach Chodesh coming and there's inspiration, but there's still the limitations of the time. And I think it's fair to look at Talmud, for example, and say, okay, that idea is not very appealing to me. I mean, I think we've done better than that now. We've advanced culturally, or maybe there's a higher standard we can derive from the Torah, right, from the Chumash, and I think it's fair. I think it's fair to be able to. I hold by the consensus. I don't always agree with it. I mean, sometimes I see better readings that I can derive from Chumash, but I still hold by the consensus, especially when it comes to ritual and community matters. I mean, for example, our calendar is broken.
Yeah, but where does the Torah say to follow consensus? In fact, the Torah says, "Do not follow consensus if it's evil."
Follow a majority to do evil. Yes, I know. I'm very much.
So the concept of consensus is not a Torah concept. The concept of truth and justice is a Torah concept. So ultimately, we have to look for, like, if you have it says, "Do not follow for evil or to pervert." Right? When you have a dispute, do not respond over that dispute to pervert after the majority, which means that if we're having a debate about what is the truth of the law, and you're seeing the consensus being in opposition to the scripture, that is obviously untrue. So I just think that we have to search for truth, not for consensus. I mean, even just taking modern examples of like where the consensus at is, like, scientifically, like I'm disgusted by the consensus of the world, or like the consensus of what people come to. I think people have no idea what they're talking about. I think the appeal to consensus is just the appeal to majority and authority and an attempt to shut you up. Like, you don't want to be different than the crowd. You better follow what we say. It's not a substantive debate at all.
This is part of what I really, really, truly appreciate about you. I truly do. My anchor point back on this discussion is lo tasor, do not turn away. And the reality is that what was the authority of the Amoraim, of the sages of the Talmud? I mean, they are an echo of the authority of the Tanaim, and the Tanaim are even lower than the Beit Din Gadol of the Second Temple, the Sanhedrin of the Second Temple. So what I would like to see develop is more of a more textured understanding within the Jewish world of these different levels of halakhic authority, including skeptical thinking and the ability to say, okay, this thing in the Talmud, whatever it is, I don't like it. I mean, it reflects culture in the 400s and Babel and Persia, right? And to be able to say that, and that's fine. That's fine. I still walk away for myself bound by the same halacha, but I can still say that, okay, this is part of our human experience. This is part of our Jewish experience in exile, and this is part of who we are. And I don't have to do unethical things as a result of it. I mean, I can simply just acknowledge when there are areas that are not optimal for human behavior, and I'm not saying the Talmud is teaching suboptimal human behavior, right? But I am saying that
saying that you can betroth a woman, a 3-year-old girl, with intercourse seems quite suboptimal.
It's not saying you can. It's saying that the court can't adjudicate regarding it. The court doesn't have the authority to implement the penalties for that. It's not saying it's still unethical. I mean, our tradition still. I mean, okay, so the issue of Isaac and Rebecca, right? The midrash on that. I'm guessing you're probably familiar with that. That Rebecca was 3 years old, right? And the reality is that we don't have to hold to that. I mean, it's a midrash. Why was it there? I don't know why we have that midrash. I don't understand why we have it. I don't think we can derive 3 years old from the text, right? And and that's quote just midrash. I mean, move from there to Talmud and the Gemaras, right? And the question isn't what's right or wrong; it's what's punishable or adjudicable by the court. And the court doesn't have a God's eye view of the world. The court, I mean, if somebody commits violence and murder and there are no witnesses, the court is limited in what they can do, even if the evidence is pretty express, right? So the court has its hands tied. It can't do a God level implementation of justice. And that's why we trust God to do justice. But we don't celebrate behavior like being with minors. We don't celebrate that. I mean, if anything, the Jewish tradition has helped move the world away from such behaviors. I mean, through our influence has been experienced in Christianity and Islam, and we've moved the world away from those things, right? So yes, for what that's worth, that's a big one.
Yeah, I just think, again, like to express things in this way, if anything, that's kind of the problem. Is like, instead of asking like what would a God's eye view be, we're pretending that like this is even a necessary legal discussion, and the statement is a girl at 3 years old is able to be betrothed in marriage through intercourse, as a legal definition. That, again, that's terrible. And I don't know why we have to
not that it's capable of happening. It's that a person is patur, the person is not liable before the court in that situation. And I mean, is there any instance in our tradition where that's happened? I mean, if anything, our tradition would abhor that.
I mean, again, we don't know that. But I mean,
I can tell you right now, you and I both agree, if that were to happen, we both would condemn it.
Yeah, we'd condemn it right now. Mm-hmm.
Right now, and maybe at different times in the history of humanity, things are viewed differently, and it's a disgusting reality of human history.
Mm-hmm. For sure, but I'm just saying, like, here, I'm just reading the Mishnah to you. Nida 44b: a 3-year-old girl who's 3 years old in one day can be betrothed in marriage with sexual intercourse. I mean,
okay, that's Nida 44b, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the Mishnah, so you can't even say that's the Talmud.
Well, no, that's Talmud. That's Talmud.
It's the Mishnah in the Talmud.
Yeah, it's the Mishnah in the Talmud. Okay, hang on.
And again, it gives me no joy to point these things out, but it's like, you know, as you said, you can't be hiding these things. Like, if this is the reality of the Jewish writings, we shouldn't be here trying to run cover for it. We should just be like, yeah, terrible. unacceptable, not the word of God, not true.
Well, it's not acceptable. I mean, okay, so I agree. It's not ethical. Okay, it's not ethical, and I think it's perfectly fine to point that out. But I think we also need to understand this as part of our unfolding historical fidelity to the Torah. I mean, we've worked through these topics. It says Bath Shalosh Shanim Yom Echad Mitkadeshes Bavia. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It does say that, and that it's through intercourse. But it's not saying it's permissible, though. It's saying that if that were to happen, it would be a legally binding, adjudicable marriage. Meaning, if that were to happen, there'd be a legal marriage. Not that should happen or that's allowed to happen, but relative to marriage law, it would be a legal marriage.
I don't even agree with. Do you agree with that? You think that a 3-year-old who is
today? No, absolutely
and then
not.
Yes. How is that? How is that?
Well, I mean, just 200 years ago, a minor was a different age than we are today.
I'm not talking about teenage girls. I'm talking about a 3-year-old child.
Yeah,
that's way different. Again, the Torah itself says in Deuteronomy that when a man rapes a woman, it's like he murdered her, right? The Torah itself teaches us that a man forcing himself on a woman when there's no way for her to call out or protest, which obviously applies to a 3-year-old girl, is like murder. So that should be.
So I would hope, Israel, I would hope that a future Beit Din Gadol, if it came across this behavior, would adjudicate for rape. Mm-hmm. And the fact is the court would have that authority to do so. But this is a I would call it a fossil of our legal system. And
right. So again, doesn't this, like, you said you're following this fossil of a legal system on the basis of Deuteronomy 17.
I wouldn't say I follow this. I wouldn't say I.
No, you don't follow this particular Mishnah, thank God, but you follow the overall Mishnaic corpus.
I accept the human face of our tradition. I accept the human. The fact is that we have a tradition that has a human face.
Yes,
and I accept that.
And on the you accept that on, as you said, on the basis of Deuteronomy 17. Do not stray to the right or the left from what they command you. Now, again, there's so many caveats here to point out, because first of all, Deuteronomy 17 is explicitly talking about a court that is operating from the place that God chooses, and it says Deuteronomy 17:10, listen to them, what they tell you from the place that God chooses, right?
Which means doesn't exist anymore.
Which doesn't exist. And so what the place that gives the authority is the fact that God himself is resting his presence there, the fact that there is an active priesthood that is ordained by God, that is active there. And again, even then, their job is not to sit there and make up laws. Their job is to settle disputes that are too difficult for the regular courts to settle. And it's the man who acts with maliciously to go against the court rulings who is held accountable. But if you're going to stand up to the court and be like, this is clear, like if the court is clearly guilty of corruption, first of all, they probably wouldn't be in the place that God chooses, which is what's going on right now, that we're not in the place that God chooses. But also, you would have to protest a court that is openly acting immorally and corruptly. So here's the thing. That's the point. It's not just like a blanket authority. It's, first of all, very specific conditions to even classify this court. Like, again, I was told, like, oh, you have to listen to your third grade Rebbe, because it says do not go to the right or the left, right? So they completely take this out of context and apply
it's been blown into
rabbis in general. But that's a really important thing, right? Because like you can't loan that out of context. That is the whole context is the basis of the authority. An active priesthood ordained by God, a judge at the top of the people, who the majority of the judges in the book of Judges and Samuel were prophets or had prophetic experiences, and you have a Levitical priesthood that's ordained by God, and you're in the place that God is resting his name. None of that exists nowadays.
We agree we don't have those conditions today. And where we disagree is that I see the Mishnah as the attempt to bottle up, to archive that. I read a story recently of somebody was traveling in the mountains, and somebody was on the side of the road selling mountain air in bottles, right? And the question is, can you really bottle up mountain air? right? They're selling at $10 a bottle of Mountain Air, right? And I'm holding that the Mishnah is the attempt to bottle up and preserve and to archive, however imperfectly, a connection to the Sanhedrin. Okay, and so I mean, and so it would appear to me that you're saying that no, you can't bottle up Mountain Air.
I mean, I think you'd agree with that. So using your metaphor, maybe you should just climb the mountain yourself, and then you can breathe in as much
As a
mountain air as you
people, we
want.
need to. We both agree on
Oh,
this. We both need to climb the
start as
mountain.
an individual. You know, that's the Torah's message. There was no people at the time of Noah. There was no people at the time of Abraham. Even Moses, climbed the mountain himself, and God said, "I will destroy the people and make a nation out of you." And Moses was gracious enough to beg for their forgiveness. But God values righteous individuals, even in the midst of evil multitudes. So I don't think that we should wait on the national restoration. We should begin the return in our individual lives, and that is what will lead to the national restoration.
I want you to. I hope you keep pushing on these issues because they are important. For me, I see the spectrum of the individual and the nation, and I've moved into a position where I am holding myself accountable to the nation in a way that my individuality is part of that process. And when I hear you say, I'm going to say something that might. On the one hand, I applaud what you're doing. Like what you just said there was great. But here's where I see what to me feels like a very Western individualistic, almost like a Protestant spirituality, and that's the individual as being their own, to use the term, their own authority, in the sense that the nation is nullified. It feels to me. And I'm not insulting you, but I'm identifying what you just described there. That feels to me more like a Protestant Christian mentality than a Jewish mentality. And
I mean, that's not an insult. I have respect for the Protestant movement.
I do too.
And I think that
we have Protestant evangelicals. I'm very grateful for them too. So.
Yeah, and I think that the Protestants are responsible for creating some of the greatest nations
Absolutely.
on earth, including
they've taken our Torah and they've done amazing things with it in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very grateful.
Yeah, and the Catholics could have never done that because the Catholics, are subject to Rome and the priests.
That and they have more of a desire. They have more idolatry. So I mean, there's
exactly
a lot.
Exactly. So
the Protestants have created civilizations that embody Torah principles very well.
Yeah, I mean, the founding fathers of the United States were quoted. John Adams said the 5 books of Moses is sufficient unto itself to govern a nation, and he used the 5 books of Moses to prove, used the 5 books of Moses to prove that slavery should be abolished, because it says one who kidnaps someone and sells him is punishable by death, which clearly does not justify the slave trade. So, this is just so vital here to understand that the individual is not overriding the nation to the point that the nation ceases to exist, but rather that a healthy, holy nation is comprised of complete individuals and people that are actually committed to God in their own heart and their own personal life. And a nation made up of those kind of people is a nation that's actually worth being a part of, and actually a nation that can survive. What we have now is a bunch of nameless, faceless automatons following a system that is controlling them, and we're calling that a nation. That's not a nation. That's just a conglomerate, machine. So the reality is, yes, the individual has to come first, because you are your own world. You have your own family. You have your own life. You're not supposed to act in opposition to the other people. In fact, if you're following the Torah, you would be the most moral person around. You wouldn't be stealing. You wouldn't be killing. You wouldn't be committing adultery. You wouldn't be coveting. You would be helping those who are less fortunate.
You would not be marrying 3-year-olds.
You would not be marrying 3-year-olds. You would not be marrying someone of the same sex. You would not be doing anything that immoral, really. I mean, you can't deny someone who follows the Torah is a complete moral individual. So you're not in conflict with the rest of humanity, but you are not going to sell your own identity for for something else, because that's what a slave is. A slave loses their identity.
Sure.
God wants us to be free. God wants us to follow his commandments. And, to the extent that that can spread to the nation, great. But if Noah was sitting in front of you and Noah was like, listen, like, this world is corrupted. I got to tell you, I've never seen so much corruption in my life. This is a terrible generation. And you're just like, come on, Noah, like, just get with the program. This is the people, it's the nation, right? I don't think none of us would be around if Noah followed your advice. So I think that the Torah tells us, don't worship yourself. You're not prioritizing your individuality because you're some like grand pope authority, like high court authority. I'm not claiming that my interpretations are absolute truth. I'm presenting my interpretations as a possibility. I'm throwing in my opinion in the mix of Talmudic arguments. But it's not about self-worship, but it's about understanding that if you don't have a self, then you can't do or be anything. You can't love your fellow as yourself if you don't love yourself. You can't love your fellow as yourself if you don't have a self. So like that's a
really important
wake-up
call, and I appreciate that. See, and I would say we need to be a nation of individuals that have exactly what you just said there. Torah reads, Ziva Lanu Moshe Torah. Ziva Lanu Torah. How's it go? Ziva Lanu
Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe.
Thank you. Marosha, Kehilath Yaakov, right? It's the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob. One of the things I've experienced in my own, I went from Christian spirituality, which I was very individualistic, to Jewish spirituality, which is very much in a collective, right? For better or worse, right? One of the aspects of my Jewish experience has been this idea of the Marosha, the inheritance. And there's an aspect in which the national identity of the individual is elevated into a higher level of kedusha, of holiness, where the individual doesn't experience the same draw. I mean, I've done both. I've done the individualistic. I tried the Karaite path, and then I've gone with the national path, right? And for me, what I've experienced in my own life is that the national path creates higher levels of accountability, high levels of opportunity for kedusha, for holiness, and for the individual path. To me, I mean, I think you can see I'm still very individualistic, right? And that's why I like you, is that you have that you've moved the other direction, right? Where you moved from more the collective into the individual. I moved from the individual into the collective. I think we're kind of like somewhere like we're able to see each other in a way that others maybe can't, right? But for me, my journey, for me, going from being just individualistic to being nationalistic, for me, that created just a higher level of depth in my ethical growth and a higher level of holiness, kedusha, in my growth. And that's my experience. Okay, I mean, I would think that would be a common experience for many people, but that was my experience.
I understand. And again, like, having been part of the collective, I'm aware of the benefits that come to you from going to the prayer services every day, from singing the songs, from being engaged with the community, and all like criticisms aside, the Orthodox community is a very attractive community to be part of. It's probably one of the best preserved communities out there, in the sense that it is close knit and they do support each other, and there is, like, for all the corruption we can talk about, there is a lot of good. And I'm clearly a product of all that goodness, and I know that, and that's why it doesn't necessarily bring me pleasure to call these things out. People are like, oh, who hurt you? Like, you had a bad experience. Like, I genuinely never had a bad experience. No one ever hurt me.
Awesome. I love that.
Yeah, no, like, I had what would be considered probably the best possible experience you can have as an Orthodox Jew. Like, my father was a rabbi. I was always like adored, and I loved all the people. Like, I have no hard feelings against any of these people, and none of them ever did me wrong. The reason why I'm doing what I'm doing is simply because I believe in this, and I want to live my life this way, and I want to have the freedom to live my life this way, and I believe that I have the right, and I believe that the truth needs to prevail, and that if the truth prevails, it'll bring us to even better points as a nation. And what you're quoting, by the way, Deuteronomy 33:4, Moses commanded us the Torah, that is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, right? And what I think you did there was a mistake, because you separated the Torah and the inheritance, right? But as I read the verse, I'm seeing that the Torah that Moses commanded us is the inheritance of the congregation of Jacob, right? Which means that the Torah itself is our inheritance, as Moses tells us in chapter 4 of Deuteronomy. This is your wisdom and understanding before the people, right? Deuteronomy 30. This is your life, right? So this is not the Torah is our inheritance. So it's not that the Jewish people have some sort of separate inheritance, and the Jewish people pride themselves so much in their culture and their history, and it's like you're missing the boat. This is not about like how advanced Israel's technology is. Okay, this is the
No,
fact
it's not. It's
that
about Torah.
it's about the Torah. The Torah is your wisdom and understanding. The Torah
it is about the Torah.
Is your life, right?
And so for me, the way I see Torah is not just as like a piece that we lock away in the safe, and I see it rather as a civilizational structure that we build, like a tree, like an acorn that grows.
Oh, of course, that's exactly what the Torah is, and it's there to govern a nation. It's there to support people and to root out all forms of corruption and to make us a godly and holy people. So it's absolutely beautiful.
Beautiful, I love it. I appreciate your sentiment, and I'm hoping that we can continue this conversation specifically. Do we have time to look at the sunrise day at all?
Yeah, we should get to the main event of the evening.
Main event.
Yeah. So when does the day begin? In the evening or in the morning? So how about you make your case, and then I'll tell you. Case.
I mean, I'm going to start off with a profound degree of agreement.
Okay.
The default day in the Chumash and the Torah is the sunrise day, without question.
Okay, so you agree with me?
I agree, but when it comes to Shabbat and Yom Tov and festivals, I say it's a sunset. But the default day, I mean, we see right in the creation. How does it read? Vayehi erev, vayehi voker yom echad. There was setting and there was morning yom echad, day one. Why is there a setting first? Well, because it's a sunrise day, right? Sunrise day. I mean, it's assumed right in the beginning that we have a sunrise day in Genesis 1.
I mean, already with that statement, though, you're departing from the Orthodox reading, because the rabbis use there was evening and morning as proof that the night precedes the day. But they fail to acknowledge that you cannot have evening if you don't have a day before it. So if you look at the sequence of events in the Torah, everything was dark, then God created light. The light was called day, then there was evening, as in the day ended, and then there was morning of the next day, and the previous day was completed.
Yeah, I'm aware that the majority of the Midrashim all say the opposite of what I'm saying. I will be having. I do have some sources here to discuss the Orthodox stance on this. But one other passage here, I have it on my other screen here, Leviticus 7:4. It says, "Uvasar zavach todath shalamav," the flesh of his Thanksgiving offering, but Yom Korbanu, on the day that he makes the offering, Ya'achol, he shall eat it. Lo yaniach memenu ad boker, shall not remain with him until the morning. If you're tracking with that, if you're making that zavach, that offering during the day, it says you have to have it finished by the morning. Okay, so that's a sunrise day, right?
The next morning is the next day. Great.
What's that?
Yeah, the next morning is the next day.
For sure, absolutely. And of course, then we have the famous verse in Leviticus 23, right? I'm going to pull it up here. It says, regarding Yom Kippur, it says, but Tisha on the 9th, Lachodesh of the month, Ba'erev, at the evening, Me'erev, ad Erev, from the evening to the evening, Tishbatu Shabbat Kamishal, cease your cessation or stop your stopping or celebrate your Sabbath. The fact that it's defining on the 9th with the sunset, it shows a sunrise day. Going quite honestly, I'm pretty sure that you're familiar with this passage already and spent time on it. But it's assuming a sunrise day as the default. So the way I frame this, we're in agreement at this point, right? We're seeing sunrise days, and I don't have all my sources in front of me, so I didn't know how much we would get into this, but I'm going to read a quote here from one of my favorite Bible scholars. He was an Orthodox rabbi. He was an Italian academic and Bible scholar. This is a little bit ad hominem. Okay, I'm using his authority. Okay, but I'm gonna just offer this here. I can share as a screen share if that would help.
Whatever you like, or you can just read it to me. What's
okay.
his name?
It's Umberto Casuto. This is in his commentary on Bereshit, on Genesis, specifically in Genesis 1. It's about a paragraph long. I'm going to read it here. It says, "It will thus be seen that throughout the Bible there obtains only one system of computing time. The day is considered to begin in the morning. But in regard," now this is where we disagree, and I'm using his authority for the moment, okay? "But in regard to festivals and appointed times, the Torah ordains that they shall be observed also the night of the preceding day. This point is explicitly emphasized whenever a certain precept has to be observed, particularly at night." So like on the Pesach, or the fasting beginning in the evening for Yom Kippur. He goes on to say, like the eating of unleavened bread on the night of the Passover and fasting on the day or the evening of the Day of Atonement. In the case of the Sabbath and other festival days, however, there was no need to stress that work was prohibited on the night preceding, since agricultural tasks are performed only by day. There is no discrepancy, therefore, in our verse at all. I forget what verse he's commenting on, but it's in his commentary to Genesis. This is where I don't have Rabbi Hirsch, the founder of Orthodoxy, in his commentary on the Chumash, he states there are two starts of the year in the Torah. We have the going out of the year in the fall, and we have the start of the months in the spring. So we have like a fall calendar and a spring calendar. He says likewise we have a sunrise day, which is the temple day, because the avoda begins in the morning, and then we have a sunrise day, and sunset day, and that's the day for Sabbath and festivals. So, and I realize it's not explicit in the Torah that we have a distinction there. We have examples, Yom Kippur and Passover, where we have an observance that is tied to an evening. And when it comes to the Yom Kippur legislation, the way it's worded is unique. It says Me Erev ad Erev Tishbatu Shabachim. And I see that as being normative for all the festivals. The Torah often behaves like that. It will give a normalizing statement that is meant to be normalizing without always specifying how normalizing that is, right? And so holding by our tradition, yes, I do see the Sabbath and the festivals as being sunset in their orientation, but the day itself, by default, is going to be the sunrise day. So this position, I mean, have you heard this before? I'm curious.
Well, I think that is the mainstream Orthodox position. Leaving aside the Genesis 1, which reading it correctly for the first time was kind of like a light bulb went off, because I was so indoctrinated with the Yada context, evening comes before morning, realizing evening and morning is actually a 12-hour period and doesn't even account for a full day. But let's just say, we have less to debate upon, because we can agree about Genesis 1 and the general fact that a day is beginning in the morning. It comes down to how far we extrapolate Leviticus 23, saying, or same thing with Passover, right? And Exodus 12 as well, saying this is an evening to evening structure. Now, in the same way that you're arguing that you believe that when it says follow evening to evening by Yom Kippur and Passover, that's normalizing it for everything else, I would take the opposite approach, which I think that the fact that it is uniquely stated by those two holidays makes it unique to those two holidays. And for the Passover, we know very clearly historically why that is the case, because the Passover was brought in the evening and then they left like that night, right? So historically speaking, we're celebrating and commemorating that what happened at that time. And what happened was they brought the Passover offering in the 14th in the evening. But even listen to that wording, 14th in the evening. It's not the 15th. It's the 14th in the evening. So the first day of Passover is the 15th, but we begin on the 14th in the evening, right? That is explicitly structured by Passover. As far as Yom Kippur, I don't know the reason. I can speculate that it's easier to afflict yourself from evening to evening. So maybe God is being nice to us, right? Because like if you had to afflict yourself for a full 24-hour period, you have to go through a whole day without like eating or
Sure, the nighttime
and
as well, and
yeah, then the
going to
nighttime
bed hungry.
would be brutal versus like,
Yeah, yeah,
if you get to just sleep through the night first and then just have a day, it's actually easier. I don't know if that's the reason, but it's a potential reason. And again, what this scholar is saying regarding the agriculture, like how would you explain Zichron Teruah, what the Jews call Rosh Hashanah? That's not an agricultural holiday, yet it is still the beginning in the morning because it just says on the first of the month. So I would say we have to go with, if someone tells you do this on Wednesday, that means Wednesday morning, unless they specify Tuesday night. So I would say that because we've established that the default of the day is the morning, the deviations of the Day of Atonement and Passover are just that. They're deviations where God has to explicitly tell us on those holidays to observe it differently. But when it comes to the other holidays, we should take the default understanding of what a day is and start in the morning. And one final point, even that verse in Leviticus 23 with the Day of Atonement, it says, from evening to evening you shall rest on your Sabbath. And it uses the word Sabbath singular. So it's not like a general rule saying like, just to give the people the Hebrew, it would be me'erev ad erev tishbedu shabtotechem would be how you say plural. But it doesn't say shabtotechem, your Sabbaths. It says shabbatchem, your Sabbath.
Yeah,
your singular Sabbath. This is Leviticus 23:32. Right, so it's the singular Sabbath, particularly the Sabbath of the Day of Atonement, that we're told to follow from evening to evening. But again, I don't think you'd be able to extrapolate that out to the other festivals.
Okay, so you're saying a few things really quick. So you're saying that because we can normalize the day as a sunrise day, that when we come across these examples in Leviticus with Yom Kippur and with Exodus 12 with Passover, that
They're
they
outliers.
are the exceptions. They're outliers. Okay, so you're saying that they are the outliers. Okay, one thing I want to point out that you mentioned about the Erev, about Passover, it's called the 14th. It is, and it comes down to how we define Erev, right? In Devarim in Deuteronomy 16, it says Kavo Hashem, at the going out of the sun. I hold to the Erev being the time of the afternoon of the 14th, right? And
that's
I would.
that's I think that's a really flawed interpretation. I've seen that in like Art Scroll translation. They translate Erev as afternoon. There's a word for afternoon. It's Tzoharayim, and the reason why Tzoharayim is afternoon.
It's not used in Torah though. It's only used in later Jewish literature. Tzoharayim. I could be wrong on that. I
really want to say it's used in the Torah.
Maybe it's used in Bereshit one time. But
so the word Sohar is used for the ark, right? I think it's with Joseph and his brothers.
It might be used one time.
Yes, it's with Joseph and his brothers. He tells them to come dine with him in the afternoon.
Okay, I think you're right.
Genesis 43:16 and Deuteronomy 28 as well. So there you go. Perfect. So it's Genesis 43:16, 43:25, where Joseph tells his brothers to come meet with him in the afternoon. And Deuteronomy 28:29 talks about being. And one second. And the reason why Tzoharayim means afternoon is because Tzohar means light, right? So it's actually light in the afternoon. But the evening, as you said, Deuteronomy clearly states that the evening is sunset. There's also a term called between the evenings, Bein Ha'arbaim, which I believe would refer to the time period between sunset and nightfall. So evening itself is not a singular moment. There's dusk, twilight, which lasts for about 30-40 minute period between sunset and nightfall. But I think it's a very flawed approach to say that the afternoon is is Erev. I think Erev is very clearly.
I would still
evening.
maintain it's Erev, and I understand what you're saying there. I see it as the time at which the sun begins to begin its descent, not directly at the time, but soon after. I do think the rabbinic position there is defensible, but I mean, I personally don't want to discuss that today. One thing I want to point out though is that, okay, so we've diverged on this issue, right? Okay, so you're saying that the exceptions are Yom Kippur, Passover, okay. And I'm saying that they are the normalizers for the Sabbath and festivals.
Also, you don't start the festivals in the afternoon, do you?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
So,
okay. Yeah. I mean, there's more to be said here. But I will say that this is an example of where I bring in a variable to the discussion, and that's the Masorah. That's our tradition. I mean, the Karaim do this too. But they call it Sevel Yerusha, right? The burden of inheritance. And I would say that our tradition in this capacity lends itself to this reading. There's ambiguity. Are those exceptions meant to be exceptions, or are they normalizing? And our tradition would say that they are normalizing. And operatively speaking, functionally speaking, I want to point that out. So I mean, just because it is a factor for how I operate in this world. Now, you said something I have not heard many who are Orthodox intelligent say this, but you're saying that you knew already that the Orthodox world held that the sunrise day was for the temple. And
no, I said no. I said I didn't know that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I said I did. I said already. You saying that the day begins in the morning by the Torah standard is different than what Orthodox people will say.
There are sources. I mean, we have sources in the Orthodox world that agree with what I'm saying. It's not me speaking alone in this regard. Like Rabbi Hirsch, for example, in his Humash, and others. There's a pasuk in Gemara as well that speaks about the day beginning with the Kohanim in the morning. So I mean, it's in our. We have acknowledgement of this, and I mean, some of the Kiraim were also arguing for a sunrise day, and I think Ibn Ezra wrote a letter, is the Sabbath letter, to try to argue against it. So I mean, there's a rich history. There's a history. I wouldn't say rich. There's a history of this discussion within Judaism.
Right, but yet it would never cause people to change the tradition of following the festivals in the evening, which I think.
Now, I can tell you right now, if the text told us explicitly, I mean, I don't care what the Masorah says, I would do it. Okay.
Well, the text tells us explicitly to follow on the seventh day, right? So, I mean, again, even according to the Genesis account, if you're reading the Genesis account like I am, God quite literally rested on Saturday, not on Friday night, right? Because it was evening and it was morning the sixth day. So the sixth day was completed on the seventh day, and God rested on the seventh day, it says, right? Vayishpot Bayom Hashvi, right? He rested on the seventh day.
It does say that. So it doesn't define the seventh day, though. It doesn't give the parameters.
But you've already acknowledged that the seventh day is defined by the morning. And
it is.
Within the narrative too, it's saying that the sixth day was completed on the morning of the seventh, and God rested on the seventh day. So, your own Sabbath wouldn't be in alignment with God's Sabbath.
Here's where I don't see Genesis 1 as being legislative. I see it as a Sabbath-shaped reflection.
It's not legislative, but it certainly is a clue as to when the Sabbath is.
Okay. I respect your opinion on that. And
and again, I mean, this is in general how the rabbis read the Torah. I think they do false extrapolations. It's part of what they call the 13 attributes of Drash, where they
13 midot,
the 13 midot of expounding on the text. They will extrapolate things. They'll create connections, one word to another word. So, like it says that Abraham purchased, took a field with money from Ephron, and then so therefore when it says take a woman, it means with money, right? So it's like field, woman, buy, money, right? And it's like
without question,
word associations, and false extrapolations, I don't think are actually valid readings, especially when the text is structured in a way. And I agree that there are some times where one text normalizes things for other areas, but when we already have a default understanding of what the day is, and then there are two deviations, particular instructions to begin on the evening, then when those instructions are not given, I think we should go with the default, which is the day is in the morning. That
is a reasonable argument.
Yeah,
I disagree. But that's a reasonable argument. I'm not going to deny that. And this is where, for me, I have a variable that you don't have on your table, and that's the Masorah. So,
Well, of course, I mean, I have it on my table. I just don't choose
you do.
to allow it to
It
allow
functions
it.
differently.
Yeah, I just don't choose to allow it to, overrule the text.
Sure. Okay. I mean, that's fair. I think we've given a good example of the role of the Masorah in this kind of a situation, right?
Yeah, of course, and it's a good example of the role of a Torah disagreement and the ability to have a conversation about these things rationally. And these are the talking points. Like, unless someone brings up a totally new talking point, this is the debate. And it's a good debate because we do see two festivals that are explicitly said to begin in the evening. So this is something that we like genuinely have to talk about. And I think we may need God to settle debates like these. And so when you see in Deuteronomy 18, where God says, I'll appoint a prophet like Moses, I think, the Jews call him the Messiah, right? Someone that can answer these questions. The Talmud, whenever they have a question, they're like, oh, Elijah will come and answer it, right? But I think the idea is that, at the highest level, you have the hierarchy of the court that Moses set up with Jethro in Exodus 18, right? And what happens there? There's the court, the judges of thousands, the judges of 50s, the judges of 10s, right? And there's all these different levels of courts, and then there's Moses, and then there's God, right? And so, there is a hierarchy, and at the top of the hierarchy sits God. And to have access to God the same way Moses was able to ask God, like, what do we do with the guy gathering sticks? What do we do with the guy, the blasphemer, right? What do we do with Zelophehad's daughters, right? To have access to God is really the key that's missing here. And if we had that access, I think we'd be able to settle a lot of these disputes.
So I struggle with this. Okay, so and I know that you're familiar with the idea of Lo B'Shamayim Hi, right? The Torah is not in heaven, right? And part of a fundamental of the rabbinic project is that we don't receive prophecy, nevuah, to settle cases of questions, right? That we settle them based on the Torah as we've received it. Okay, and of course, in the rabbinic project, that includes the idea of the tradition, legal precedent. And so when I hear you say that and I'm being sincere here. This is not just me trying to do a gotcha, because this is something I think about quite a bit, right? If a prophet were to come and say, okay, so and so is right about, I mean, I don't think he would say he was right or wrong. He would just say what the truth is. Okay, the day begins XYZ. Okay, this is the word of God, right? At that point, the idea that the Torah is not somewhere where we have to go up and get it. The Torah is not far away where we have to retrieve it, right? If a prophet has to come to clarify something that's already been given to us, are we relocating Torah back to heaven?
Well, it's not in heaven, in the sense that we already have the Torah, and personally, I think all this stuff is clear, to be honest. But to the extent that there are debates, I mean, it says to listen to the prophet. What it says, Torah is not in heaven, that someone has to go get it for you, right? But this is not someone going to get it for you. This is God himself opening his mouth and saying, this is the truth. Hey, yeah, like, this is the truth, right? That doesn't mean that God will stop communicating with us. It just means that you don't need someone else to get it for you. That's the way it's phrased, right? It says the Torah is not in the heavens, that you need some. That's what, again, like the out of context verses never work out, but it says the Torah is Deuteronomy 30:14, I believe. The Torah is not in heavens, that someone say, oh, who's going to go get it for us in heaven? The Torah is not across the sea. Who will go across the sea to get it for us, right? So the statement is, you don't need someone to go get it for you. It's in your mouth and in your heart, right? And these things are understandable, and they are. And I think genuinely, like, we can come to understandings about the majority of the things, but when there are active attempts to, like, I'm just curious, if you didn't have the Masorah, right? If you didn't have the tradition telling you to start the day in the evening, would you think you'd come to that conclusion yourself?
There's one other variable that I haven't brought to the table, only because I don't have the references. So the question is, and that's a very fair question. I don't know.
Because if it's in your mouth and your heart, you're supposed to look inward, right?
Yeah.
To really come to that appreciation.
Well, I mean, this is where I would go to, the Deuteronomy 17 framing for the judges, and this is something that I'm trusting based on the civilizational Masorah of the Jewish people, that this is something that's been discussed.
But you brought me a source of Torah is not in the heaven. So I gave you the full context of that source. It's not in the heaven that someone else needs to go get it for you. So,
well, no,
and the conclusion is it's in your mouth and in your heart, not that it's in the temple court. It's in your mouth and in your heart.
To me, that's speaking nationally. It's not speaking that the individual can adjudicate Torah at a level that nullifies for example, the court. But this question, this may have come up at some time, let's say in the year 800 before the Common Era. And the judges may have issued a ruling on this. Would that have been binding? What if it disagreed with your interpretation of it? Would it still have been binding?
Judges in the 17th century,
in the 800s of the before the Common Era. I would say during the time of David and Solomon.
Oh, okay.
Back when there was prophecy still.
Again, I don't think that they have the authority to overrule Scripture, no matter who they are.
But what if they made a ruling that disagreed with? Okay, so we don't agree. Okay, we both desire to do the Torah. We're both sincere in this regard. We come to the court, and the court says, okay, the day begins XYZ. Okay, Shabbat begins XYZ, festivals begin XYZ, right? And one of us doesn't agree because we hold a different view of what the Torah says, right? What happens in that scenario?
Yeah, I think that to the extent that the court is acting within the interest of God, and it's abundantly clear that they're taking all aspects into account, we would be obligated to listen to their ruling. Yeah.
Now, what if I disagreed with it, or you?
Yeah. Again, like there's levels of disagreement. Is what they're saying clearly false, or is what they're saying questionable? And that's their ruling. I think in that sense, you probably would be obligated to listen to them.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And quite frankly, I mean, there's enough ambiguity here in this particular discussion where I'd be happy to default to a national authority on this.
Right. I just don't think there's that much ambiguity, and I also don't think that there is any such court authority that you're referencing.
Currently, there's not.
So hypothetical. Right.
Currently we have bottled mountain air.
Right, and so that's the whole point. Is that just?
But I do believe that you can bottle mountain air. Okay, I'm going to be clear on that.
Yeah, I understand. I'm just saying that the mere fact that this is the situation we're in warrants the recognition that we need to have these independent discussions and follow the best of our understanding, because appealing to mountain air preserved from 3,000 years ago, that's again not the law. It's not the law. The Torah explicitly says you have to follow what's written, right? And to just call these echoes of authority and tradition, by the way, emanating from a people that were so deeply removed from the Torah that the king of Israel didn't even know that it existed, right? King Josiah didn't know that the Torah existed. God shows Ezekiel priests worshiping devils and demons inside the temple walls, right? Like bowing down to the sun in temple courtyard.
Too. It sounds like we had a corrupt court at the time.
That's what I'm saying.
I believe it mentioned 70 in there.
Okay. Well, there you go. So I'm just saying that however you cut it, it's like what's been preserved is not that good either. Like there's a lot of the sins of the fathers. The sins of the fathers are pretty significant. So I don't think we should just rely on these traditions. I think we should make an attempt to have these conversations ourselves. And again, just to push back more on that idea that the Torah is not in the heavens, that someone else who will go up to the heavens and take it for us. But if God himself comes and speaks to us, that's not what's being said, right? Like that's why you have the Bava Metzia 59a or something with the oven, oven, right? They have the oven, the Achnai oven debate, and God himself calls out from heaven and no, God, come on, right? It's like no, like God is calling to you. That's much different than you saying, oh, who's going to go up into heaven and take it for us, right? God himself is calling to you. That is in your mouth and in your heart, right? God is speaking directly to us. That's a much different scenario than, we're saying, oh, like, we need someone to go get it for us. And God is really pushing us to our limits here, saying, like, if I'm not going to speak to you and I'm not going to tell you something, that means that you can do this, right? So that means at this current moment in time, we can follow the Torah to the best of our abilities using the information that we have. And again, to the extent that God appoints a prophet like Moses, it says you should listen to what he says. And, when you see a prophet like Moses, you have no doubt that he is speaking in the name of God. Like, literally the only one who doubted Moses was Korach, and Korach got swallowed up. Like, there's no way that you can see everything that happened with God through Moses and then say, oh, that was not God, right? So we would need to see that level of communication in order to believe it. But right now, again, it's all theoreticals. The court, non-existent. The prophet, non-existent. What do we have? We have the document. We have the document of the Torah that says do not add or subtract. We have the document of the Torah that says return to God, heart and soul, you and your family. We have the document of the Torah that says the way to return to God is to follow what is written in this book, not what is oral tradition of the community and the nation. So we should follow the instructions that are in the Torah.
Israel, I appreciate you. As you know, I don't agree in the end with the implications of what you said there, but I agree with the heart of it. So I appreciate you.
Okay, and yeah, I appreciate you as well. Thank you for having the discussion, and it may be a blessing to the world.
Likewise. Awesome.
Join the perfectingtheworld.com community today.